This is the Regained Wellness Podcast with Jamie Logie, episode 171, The Crazy History of the Happy Meal. Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome back to the podcast, or welcome if you're new. I'm Jamie Logie. I run regainedwellness.com, and this is the Regained Wellness Podcast. And a bit of a different episode here today about the Happy Meal, which obviously involves nutrition, but it's also a real story on marketing and to kids and pop culture related stuff. And hopefully you find this interesting. I did. Just one of those things you just start learning about, and you're like, oh, wow, I had no idea what went behind this thing. Because we all we've had a Happy Meal at some point in our lives, or you've given them to your kids or whatnot. So I think it's just worth looking into this whole story. So let's take a look. Okay, so if you're a kid of the 80s, this is when the Happy Meal kind of burst onto the scene. And it actually, again, like I've done other, talk about McDonald's and things like that, and we know the nutrition issues, which I'll get to, but it's like with the Happy Meal, it's really weird because it has roots in kind of more of a noble cause. It wasn't invented by some corporate stooge. It originally started in the mid-70s with a woman named Yolanda Fernandez de Cofino, and she lived in Guatemala, and her husband operated a few different McDonald's down there. And she was very aware of the number of young mothers that she saw coming into her restaurant, and she knew the challenges they faced with raising young kids. So she noticed how difficult it could be for a mother to feed, screaming kids, and they're running all over the place. So she came up with what she called the Menu Ronald, or the Ronald menu. And this was a meal that offered a hamburger, fries, and a small sundae as a way for those mothers to more effectively feed their children. So from here, it somehow makes its way to some of the McDonald's management in Chicago. And eventually, so they like the idea, but the concept of it was turned over to a guy named Bob Bernstein, and he developed more of the concept of the Happy Meal that we know now. And this guy was a consultant for McDonald's. He would regularly meet with owners of McDonald's, and they would go over all the things related to like customer experiences and whatnot. But the big one that would always come up with these clients that ran the McDonald's is how they could create a better experience for families and kids. So up until the Happy Meal, if you watch kids in a restaurant, whether it was fast food or a regular one, or still happens now, kids would often like pick at their parents' meals. And kids menus in general are not a big thing yet, sort of in the late 70s, 80s. It's hard to think of any form of food service that doesn't cater to kids, and they're like picking us now, but that was sort of the case. So this is 1977, and they had this idea passed on from Guatemala, and seeing like this might be something, this could be a good idea. Why don't you just package a kid-specific meal? Seems obvious now, but like at the time this hadn't been done. So this is McDonald's though, and it's not going to be as simple as just throwing some food together. You have to think about branding and the McDonald's experience and all that crap that they shove on us. So what happened was this Bernstein guy, he made note that when he ate breakfast with his son, and his son, probably like all of us did if you grew up in the 80s or even now, would spend the whole meal reading the back of the cereal box. Like if you're a kid growing up, this was basically your newspaper or your iPhone. This is where you'd get like information and entertainment. And you remember how like interactive cereal boxes would be. So he wanted to take this concept and bring it into kids' meals. So the idea that Yolanda had in Guatemala was great, but it was the packaging that was really the key. So they called in their creative team to start working on mock-ups for the kids' meal packaging. And they started throwing together some paperboard boxes, and they had the idea to form it into what looked like a lunch pail. They thought that this would look familiar to kids and would seem sort of like a natural progression. And also doing this, it gave them the ability to turn the handles into the golden arches to carry it. So branding wherever possible. So now you got a box that's got a lot of real estate to cover. and they wanted more kid-friendly content on the sides and the top and the whatever. So they called in some nationally known children's illustrators and told them they basically had a blank slate and they could create whatever they wanted on the box's sides. So they would come up and use things like jokes, art, different games, comic strips. They're trying to basically create a similar thing to that cereal box experience. So the comic strips they would put on the sides, obviously like the Happy Meal boxes and arts and stuff would evolve, but at the time it was more cartoonish, more fantasy, anything that would appeal to a kid. And each box for every different design had to have at least eight different items to keep kids interested, whether it was like games or a puzzle or a comic. So it had to include at least eight different pieces of content. So the food content stayed pretty simple. It was always pretty much just like a burger or cheeseburger, small fries. And instead of the small sundae, they went with a package of cookies because that was seen to be a little less messy option. And they didn't have to prepare as much. They could just throw it all together, have them ready to go. And they would have a drink with it. And Bernstein gave it the name the Happy Meal. So this looked good. They wanted to really not waste any time in getting the Happy Meal into our dirty little hands. So they started to roll out commercials and radio ads in October 1977. They started a test market in Kansas City, kind of fine-tune everything. Then they'd slowly introduce it into other markets. And then they had a full nationwide rollout that happened at the end of 1979 to get this thing all ready for the 80s. So the first, I don't know if you remember these or if you've seen them, the very first Happy Meal was sort of a circus wagon theme and contained one of 6 different toys. And those first 6 toys were a McDoodler stencil, a McWrist wallet, an ID bracelet, a puzzle lock, a spinning top, and then a McDonald Land character eraser. I remember these erasers for some reason. I don't know how we got them or how they showed up, but definitely remember those. So it's the toy that really made the Happy Meal what it was and would lead to sort of future problems regarding kids' nutrition and health, which I'll get to later. So, you know, giving away a toy with food is not an original idea, but McDonald's packaged it up better. They used to have, do you remember this? They used to do the treat of the week. It was a toy that would change weekly. But with the Happy Meal, it was kind of a surprise. You didn't know what you were going to get with it. And I think this is the big appeal with things like Happy Meal McDonald's. Each box you get is a bit different, and it's unique, and it's always changing. And I think that appeals to kids a lot. You don't even think of it as like when I think of a Happy Meal, I think of more of like a present. And I don't even think of the food per se. Like everything in there is sort of like a gift. So the toys start off simple and cheap. Obviously, become much more complex over time. And of course, because it's McDonald's, they didn't really even wait before having a tie-in promotion. The first one is in 1979, almost right off the bat, and they released a Star Trek meal. So it was for Star Trek the Motion Picture that came out in December 1979. They used packaging that was made up of various images from the movie, contained some games. They had a comic strip adaptation of the movie. And they realized something very early on that was pretty ingenious and possibly lucrative. They would introduce a set of toys that you would need to collect if you wanted to complete the set. This way, kids would want to be coming back to get more Happy Meals to get that missing toy or whatever. And this would work pretty well in the long run. So probably what was the biggest advancement of the Happy Meal was in 1987 when McDonald's first introduced a Disney-based Happy Meal. So now you've got the perfect storm of 2 huge enterprises coming together over some, deep fried food. Kids are sort of merciless at this point, and there's no way they can resist it. Disney's thrown every Disney entity ever in the Happy Meal. Mickey Mouse, Cinderella, Aladdin, Lion King, Finding Nemo, anything. So and now McDonald's is like, wow, let's not stop there. Let's just go haywire, and opens the floodgates with every property you could think of over the years. So Transformers, Hello Kitty, G.I. Joe, Lego, Barbie, Hot Wheels, Teletubbies for some reason. Everything's been in a Happy Meal. A huge thing was, if you remember the Beanie Baby craze in the 90s, if you either collected those or you might still have some hanging around, this was probably the biggest Happy Meal promotion of all time. So they put out miniature versions of the crazy popular Beanie Babies. They ended up selling 100 million of the bloody things. So, and then they would offer them annually. They couldn't lose, you know. They would even offer different like McDonald's versions of Beanie Babies, like Grimace, Ronald McDonald, stuff like that. So again, if you grew up in the 80s, kind of the golden age of, you know, fast food and fast food toys and tie-ins and stuff like that, before things got crazy out of control with giant sizes and introductions of things like high fructose corn syrup and higher uses of trans fats and whatever. Not that they were like perfect clean foods, but they weren't quite at the level they would become as far as a detriment in food quality. But at the time, I don't know if you remember some of these. Like I said, this is going to be a lot of more pop culture based stuff. If you remember some of these Happy Meal toys, there was the Muppet Babies from 1987. There was the Garfield vehicles in 89. There was DuckTale figures. They did Fraggle Rock. They did the Chippendale Rescue Ranger cars. They did, remember the little Fry Kids? They had the McDonald's pullback race cars. I remember those very well. The McNugget Buddies, that was popular. And so then this moves into more movie tie-ins. And this is to show you how actually powerful McDonald's is. And I know they're powerful as far as influencing a lot of food lobbies. Same way with Coke is they put so much money into things that will go against promoting how bad their product is, whether McDonald's or Coke, and then they'll fund a lot of studies that show like, oh, high fructose corn syrup isn't that bad, but it's completely dictated and promoted and funded by Coca-Cola, which is obviously a complete farce. And McDonald's has done the same thing. They contribute to a lot of good things, like, you know, like the Ronald McDonald House and whatever. But they have so much money that they can put into kind of manipulating people's perception of like, oh, our food isn't that bad and whatever. And just to show you how powerful they are, this has to do with movies. So I don't know if you remember the Batman sequel, the original Batman Returns from 1989 that Tim Burton made. So if you remember, like, the original story of Batman is pretty dark. It's not really a, you know, kids thing. You got this like child who sees his parents murdered and then turns into a vigilante to fight crime. But if you haven't seen Batman Returns, it's a pretty awesome movie, but it's also pretty messed up. You've got a lot of dark stuff in there. If you remember Danny DeVito playing the Penguin, there's a plot to kill all the little kids because he was orphaned. There's a lot of death in it. So this, you know, super dark tone of Tim Burton, they knew what a big franchise Batman was, so McDonald's was like all over it for the Happy Meal. But this, you know, it doesn't really mesh well with that bright, happy yellow and red sort of motif of McDonald's. And even as the movie was being finished, Burton was arguing with the censors over the movie. It was originally going to be an R-rated movie, and they were trying to cut out scenes and extra violence to bring it down to PG-13. So the version of the movie was completely up in the air. So McDonald's only got to see a very rough cut and really wasn't sure what the movie would end up being. So they signed a deal and they started marketing. I don't know if you remember this. I do vaguely, because I do remember the commercials and looked them up on YouTube. So they started actually marketing Batman Returns as a family-friendly film with their Happy Meals. So again, like, if you've seen the movie, you've got, you know, Michelle Pfeiffer being thrown out of the top of a skyscraper, people being electrocuted to death. Basically, when people started seeing this or taking their kids, they started complaining how the movie was unsuitable for children, and then McDonald's flipped out, which is ultimately their own fault. But Tim Burton said, he's like, I think I upset McDonald's. They asked, what's the black stuff coming out of the penguin's mouth? We can't sell Happy Meals with that. So it's, you know, again, it's McDonald's fault for not being more proactive and being involved with what they market. It's just, they just see dollar signs and they go with that. And it's, at this point, it's too late because people are pissed, and there's different reports. There's one parent that would write to him and say, violence-loving adults may enjoy this film, but what on earth is McDonald's pushing this exploitative movie through the sales of its so-called Happy Meal? Has McDonald's no conscience? And I would say, no, they do not at all. So at this point, McDonald's is pissed. Warner Brothers are pissed that McDonald's is pissed. And Tim Burton gets caught in this whole crossfire. And this whole debacle Happy Meal thing is what is seen to have gotten Tim Burton removed from the Batman franchise. He was originally supposed to do 3. And then the Batman movies went to absolute crap until Christopher Nolan took over with The Dark Knight. So it made McDonald's much more proactive with their toys, with the toys and movies they would market. And now they have to go over entire scripts, and it has to be approved and whatever. And so it actually shows what power McDonald's even has over dictating like how a movie would go. So it was said that McDonald's demanded that Steven Spielberg, when he made Jurassic Park, had to tone down a lot of the violent scenes before they would sign up. And he did, so that they could have this marketing tie-in. And that's also why if you remember who's the guy, Schumacher, the guy who made the other Batman movies after, like the Batman and Robin, and the ones that had like Arnold Schwarzenegger's Mr. Freeze and Jim Carrey. They took that more like campy, cartoony style. That was 100% because of McDonald's. They had to change all their direction if they wanted to have a marketing tie-in, which is insane to think of that. This giant company can completely control art and the direction of creative people. Okay, so let's look at some of the health-related issues. And it's you can't really mention McDonald's and not talk about the quality of nutrition at the same time. But the thing with McDonald's is especially with the Happy Meal, they never pretended, as much crap as I give them and other people do, they never really pretended to be anything other than fast food. That's changed over the last few years, where they've been more about promoting healthier options and whatever. And that's just more having to follow what the market's dictating. It's not them, again, taking an interest in your health. It's just having to go with what it is. But like 70s and the 80s, they were just like, we're fast food. That's it. If you're going to McDonald's hungover as hell after a night of drinking, you know what you're going in for. You know exactly why you're going in there. It's same thing with Taco Bell, which are actually like, they're trying to get into like completely vegan and vegetarian based choices across the board there. So they're either doing a whole 180 or they're just caving into the pressure. I don't know what it is, but when you go into McDonald's in the 80s, you know what you're going in for. It's fries and burgers and whatnot. So the changes have happened to the Happy Meal over the years. It started, they added chicken nuggets in 1983. They would start to make it a little better and go with like cartons of 1% milk instead of a soft drink. In 2011, they added in apple slices, famously, with a low-fat caramel dip. They actually even reduced the portion of the fries down to 1.1 ounces. So they were trying to make things a bit better. So parents would be like, okay, that's, it could be worse, but we'll at least have this for dinner. But even with those smaller portions, it's amazing how much crap is in those meals. So like if you took a normal, like a cheeseburger, fries with just, say, even like one of the milks or like a chocolate milk, you still get 700 calories in that little tiny box of food. There's 27 grams of fat in there and over 1,000 grams of sodium, which is insane for this small portion. So again, it might not have been their own choice, but like when they added in the apple slices, it's probably more because of what happened in 2010. So they introduced the apple slices in 2011. In 2010, November 2nd, 2010, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors passed a law that children's meals sold in restaurants had to meet a certain minimal nutrition requirement before they could be sold with toys. They didn't want these companies, specifically McDonald's, just trying to corrupt children by wanting to get these toys and complete these sets and make them eat this food along the way. So this was, a way they hoped to cut down on childhood obesity, and that the idea that toys could only be included on meals that had 600 calories or less. I also saw 445 calories And they also had to have less than 640 milligrams of sodium. And the meal would also have to include fruits and vegetables and a beverage that didn't have an excess of sugar or fat. So I think that's why they started throwing in the apple slices and whatnot. So sounds pretty good, right? Except those, if you want to call them proactive aces at McDonald's, were able to completely circumvent that law. And they did it by charging for the toy. They charged just 10 cents, but doing that had them able to completely avoid any of those new requirements. So, screw you kids, basically. It's McDonald's approach on all that. So I don't know, you wouldn't think this little box of food could cause so many issues, but it's an interesting story on something we've all eaten at one point or another. Again, you'll probably see them for years. This Happy Meal burst on the scene in the 80s and is a huge money maker for McDonald's. It was, it's the perfect combination for a kid. You get to have fast food, you get a toy. If you're going to McDonald's with like the Playland, it's just like crack for kids, and it's powerful stuff, and it's made a lot of people lifelong consumers of McDonald's. This is their idea with like the Playlands and everything. They call it like something like early branding or early imprinting for future consuming. The idea that if you go in as a kid, you remember the food, you remember the toys, you remember the good feelings of the Playland. As an adult, those, nostalgia and warm feelings stick with you, and you're more likely to be a McDonald's customer in the long run. So, it's an interesting thing. I don't think there's there's no stopping the Happy Meal, let alone McDonald's. And interestingly, the Happy Meal is so much of a heavyweight that McDonald's spends more money marketing and promoting the Happy Meal than they do in advertising to teens and adults combined. That's how much goes into making sure everyone is very aware of this food. Okay, let's cut it off there. Hopefully you find this interesting. It's just one of those topics I just didn't know went that deep, and just interesting to share information like this that's related to food and nutrition, but incorporates in some pop culture stuff. So yeah, that's it. If you like the show, make sure to subscribe wherever you get podcasts. I should be there. If you really like the show, leave a rating and review, and make sure to check out regainedwellness.com, and that's got everything you want to do with health, fitness, nutrition, wellness, stuff like that. Okay, I'll see you later.